Hello, this experiment is watercolour and line, looking at Year 10 or Year 11 coursework or exam when you're doing your test pages. The idea is that you're going to be a bit more experimental with your materials and just have a go at testing different effects. So watercolour and line is really nice because you get the soft, I suppose, blotchy, organic surface of the watercolour and then the more crisp, clean style of the line, so that's why it works quite nicely together. So I'm specifically looking at natural forms. Obviously you might be looking at architecture, that works quite well as well. Whatever your theme is, your experiment pages should obviously link to your theme, and you should be using your own images or secondary images to work from. So I'm imagining that I'm doing a project on natural forms and that I've looked at some watercolour and line artists, and I'm now going to do my own tests from my own pictures, ideally. So to start with, I'm going to look at just like a leaf design. Just got my watercolours, and I'm going to just look at overlapping watercolour and line. So to start with, build up your colour. I'm going to use an orangey, reddy type colour, mix your different colours together. And these pages are so important to just test and not worry about things not going perfectly well. So I'm mixing a range of reds here because I just think it's so much better than just mixing just one red or just putting one red straight on or one colour. You mix, it just makes a more interesting colour. So using a really small paintbrush, and to start with I'm just going to build up a leaf shape, and I'll be working from hopefully your own images. So looking at how the leaves kind of branch out, and I'm using a really thin tip to just do the edge of the watercolour. I just think it looks really nice if you have that nice crisp edge and then that watery, soft, organic, blotchy surface in the middle. So I'm just going to do that to get my watercolour leaf edge. Then I'm going to get some different colours. I'm going to use a darker colour now and some water, and just start to put some colour inside that leaf, going up to the edge. Really important that you leave your white areas white. If you make it completely full of colour, it just kills it a little bit. It doesn't look as bright, it doesn't look as interesting, it doesn't look as three-dimensional. So I'm using the side of my brush now, and I'm using a lot of water. I'm using different colours. I'm putting some purple into that. I might put some more orange into that. I might even put some more yellow. I'm using harmonious colours that go together. Yellow into that. So then I've got that blotchy change in colours. I've got little bits of white still showing, but it's that really natural, organic-y watercolour surface, which watercolour does so well. So again, next one, using the side of my brush, and I'm just dragging. I want that really pale kind of colour here. Again, put a bit more orange in. And it's really simple to do this. It's nice if you try to loosen up the line so you can't see that you did that first and it just looks like a crisp edge, just by going alongside that line. And then again, I'll do another, maybe a little one here. Again, you should be looking at your images, primary or secondary, and working from them. You could even stick your images in your sketchbook next to this, so that it'll be quite nice to see how you've not worked directly from them in terms of trying to make it look realistic, but at the same time you've used them in order to help you. So really blotchy watercolour leaves, and what I'm going to do now is work over the top of them. But it's really important that you make sure that it dries first. Okay, so just to help it dry, I just dabbed it with some kitchen towel. What I like about that is it takes a little bit of the paint off, and then it's more pale. If it's pale, you're going to be able to see your line better. So I'm just going to use a biro, a black biro. And then I'm going to draw another part of the leaf. So you might be doing a flower, you might be doing, say, a leaf, feather, anything like that. I draw some parts with the watercolour and then some parts with a line. Is one thing that you can do with this line and watercolour. So now I'm going to do a leaf on that side, and I'm just going to overlap it over my watercolour and then branch out. And this time, instead of focusing on the colour, I'm going to focus on the shape and just build it all up with line. The idea being that you get that nice contrast between the soft natural texture of the watercolour and then the crisp, neat, I suppose more design based style of the line. Just build that up. To do line really effectively, when you've got your darker areas, you want to use more lines, so then it will just create that contrast between dark and light. So for example, I might put more lines in the stem, near the stem of my leaf, because it's just going to make it look a little bit darker there. And then this stem as well is really, really dark, so I'm going to build that up with lots of little lines, and then I'm going to do the same to this side. As you can see on this one, I've overlapped it on the watercolour, because then you've got that nice effect of this coming through. Works really well with this flower because this is eucalyptus and has quite a transparent surface anyway, so then I've recreated that in this drawing. What you can do as well, rather than adding more lines closer together should be when it's darker, and then lines further apart where it's lighter. I'm now changing the direction of the curve and going the other way, because that will be where your leaf folds that way. If your leaf folds that way, then your curves will go that way. If your leaf starts to go that way, then it goes that way. So you try to follow the shape of your object with the lines that you create. So that's a really, really simple test with watercolour and line. So I'm now going to do a different type of test with the watercolour. So before, I actually painted some of the leaves with the watercolour and then drew some of the leaves, and now I'm just going to do almost like a background. This works really well with architecture as well, or anything like that, because you create, well, anything really, you create the colour with the watercolour, but not, you'll see what I mean, it's more of a blotch of colour, and then you do the line in, you actually draw the object over the top. So this is going to be a poppy, so I'm using red, different reds again. You still want those different colours in the watercolour. If you just use one colour, it can be a bit boring and a bit plain. So I'm going to create some blotches, I suppose, suggesting the leaves or the petals without actually painting them. So this one's going to be more just a blob there, really. Again, I did the outline, and then I'm just going to use the side of my brush to build up. So you can see it kind of looks like petals, but not in any way that's actually formed properly. And then I might do, what works really nice if you just do some more pale ones, literally just going to use some water, because I've already got the red on my brush, so I'm just going to use some water. So then I've got this blotchy blob of watercolour, and then this time I'm going to work on top of that with the line. So this time I haven't actually painted realistically or representational. This would be just an abstract blob, but then again I let it dry, and then when it's dry I will work on top of it. You can put your kitchen towel on it, or a paper towel or anything, and see how that's made. That's more pale. That's so much nicer effect with the line, because you've got the contrast between light and dark again. So I'm going to use more of a little felt tip pen this time. It's got a darker line, and then I'm going to draw the poppy over the top, but I'm not actually really thinking too much about what's underneath, because that's going to be more abstract, just creating the colour. So I'm going to look at the lines of the petals, and you see I'm going over the top of the watercolour. I'm going out over where there's not even watercolour. I suppose in a way I'm ignoring that the watercolour's there, whereas before I was actually drawing properly with it, but I'm looking at the shapes of the lines when it curves in of the poppy shape. There's the stem there, and there's another leaf, petal that comes down there, that shape, and then I'll add the lines in the same way. You don't have to add lines over the whole thing. You can do, depends what effect you want, but that is the point, that you're going to be testing different things, and that's what these pages are for, to show that you've experimented. You should be working in the style of your artists, but it's also an opportunity for you to work in the style of your artist, but then kind of go off and do your own thing with it. So on the edges of the petals, there's really, it's really dark, So I'm going to build up lots of little lines to show that it's dark. It would be darker on the edge of the petals because that's where the petals fold over, so then they wouldn't hit the light as much. I'm still trying to curve them roughly in the shape of the petals, so these lines are curving that way and then these ones would curve that way. Some little details that come through, but you can see how this is sort of using the watercolour to create the colour, but it's just a little bit more experimental, I suppose. I've just put the watercolour in the background and not actually worried too much, and it fits sometimes and it doesn't fit in other times, and that's why this works quite well. So that's a different way of doing it, when you just create a background with watercolour and then you overlap it with a line. I'm exaggerating where the dark is. It's really, really dark in the middle. It's quite dark on the edges, and then it's light in the middle of the petal, and then it makes it look 3D. There should be some dark bits along this stem. Your lines do not need to be perfectly neat. It is that sketchy style that works really well with the organic style of the watercolour. So again, this one is much darker than that one because I've used the felt tip pen instead. So now I'm going to do a more of an abstract organic watercolour. Okay, so as I said, I'm pretending that my theme was natural surfaces, or natural forms, sorry. But rather than just focusing, as these are my experiment pages, on drawing my primary pictures as a whole, you could look at the textures in your primary pictures, for example, because that's really important when you're doing natural forms, to look at the natural textures. I'm going to use maybe some different colours this time, so I'm going to look at some blues and some greens, and just going to create, this is going to be more abstract, some lines, some random lines, I suppose, some random shapes and lines. I'm not drawing anything this time, I'm just drawing some shapes. So, because you might be thinking, oh, I'm going to test what I want to do for my background, for example. Not everything is going to be, or it might not be, representational. I'm going to just draw some sections. I'm going to vary my colours, again, really, really important with watercolour. I'm going to blend some different colours together, create a section where it's, I suppose, blotchy, and it's got that natural, it almost looks like that stained effect, like a tea stain, coffee stain. Leaving your white bits light, or white, sorry, leave them completely white, and create some light areas as well. So I'm just going to create some circles, some different shapes. Again, I'm using harmonious colours, so before I used oranges, reds and a pinky colour all next to each other on the colour wheel, and now I'm going to use some bluey colours which are next to each other on the colour wheel. So I've created an almost just hopefully natural looking blotchy surface. A lot of the time I just use a brush with nothing on, no paint, just a little bit of water, and just smudge it all in. And I've created like a little natural surface. It could be almost like mould or microscopic of a leaf, something like that. Just testing with it. And then again, when it's dry, really important that you let it dry. I'm going to build up some lines. Okay, so I've got this strange blotchy surface. I'm just going to work on top of it, literally with some doodles. So I'm going to do some lines around some of the shapes, over where I've got the white areas. The intention is to create that neat, crisp line, which is going to contrast with your natural surface effect. So you might create some, where can you see some little circles? It's all to do with your personal primary images and what you can see in them. Certainly if you're looking at natural forms or even landscapes and you're looking at, I don't know, the textures of tree barks or anything like that at all, you want to be looking really, really closely, creating some different textures. essentially just going to doodle over it, and then I've got that contrast between a nice natural surface and then the strong line that goes up the top. So I'm going to build up lots of lines, lots of doodles, different patterns that remind me of natural and organic surfaces. You can draw around some of your watercolour shapes where I've got little white bits that have come through, that I've left. It's going to look quite nice. And then just some abstract lines going around. And again, this would provide a really nice background. You should be testing things like, what do I want to do for my background? What do I want to do for my foreground? What do I want to do for the middle ground? And to show that you've just tested things. And if you don't like things, you say why you don't like it. And then that's absolutely fine, and you can move on and not do it again. As long as you annotate and say why you don't like it. I'm almost trying to make my hand quite wobbly so I get that natural, not perfect surface. Could be looking at, again, a real close-up of a leaf, for example. You can use your pen really lightly to do some thinner lines, or you can press harder and build up to do some darker lines. Always, with anything, looking at the contrast between light and dark, and just build it up until you think it looks interesting. Okay, so those are my little doodles. What I've tried to do is where my watercolour has been left, my watercolour cell has been left white, I've tried to still leave it white and draw around that. So when it's lightest, draw big circles, and then when it's dark, draw loads of little ones. And I've even looked at, so that, for example, I've taken influence from that poppy petal, so I've tried to incorporate it and created this abstract surface, and then I've got some more refined ones there, so just a test page. So what I've done is made sure that my watercolour is always really pale, because then I've got that contrast between the pale soft surface and then the quite harsh line. But what you can do as well is, if you built up, this is a feather, a darker watercolour surface, you could use a white pen, or I've used a silver pen, because then you still get that contrast between light and dark, but almost the other way round, with the idea being that you're just testing. And what's really nice about using watercolour and line is that it's quick. So you could essentially, how quickly I've done that, build up so much in 1 hour of just testing, and then annotate and say what's worked well and what hasn't worked as well. Okay, thank you, and give it a go.